So in June of 2016, I'd already been using Linux for a couple of years full time. I'd used Linux some before that, but I found myself using the command line more and more for everything, and using plain text documents more and more for everything, whether that be for bash scripts or for editing my web pages or just using plain text, just .txt for different things. And so if I had something that didn't require any special formatting, I'd just open it in txt. And so I was more and more on the command line. And so my normal workflow would end up being I'd go and I'd open up my file and in gedit. And as you know, whenever you launch a graphical application from a terminal, it leaves that terminal empty. So I got thinking more. I know there's ways around that, but I got thinking more and more, it's going to make the most sense to just stay on the command line and edit my documents, edit my files on the command line, in the terminal. And I had obviously heard different people talking about Vim and the efficiency of Vim. And I'd read a book. It's a really good book by William Schatz. It's called The Linux Command Line. And he has a whole chapter just on Vim. And I thought it was fascinating how he talked about Vim and how it can become so efficient, and how it's amazing to watch someone who's, very experienced in Vim working through a file, working on a file, and just what that brings. And so I thought, well, I think it is time. It is time to embark upon learning Vim. So I didn't do a lot of intro stuff. I'd read that chapter. I'd kind of skimmed through that chapter in that book. I was like, okay, whatever, I'll just skim through this. But really all I did is I watched 2 YouTube intro videos by this guy named Shawn Biddle. They're a little older by now. They're 2012 videos, but I thought they were really good. And he just goes through the basics. And obviously the basics haven't changed much, even though that was 8 years ago. And so I did that. And then other than that, I just looked at a Vim cheat sheet. And I'm a firm believer in when you start on something, just start with the bare bones and then build up from there. So I didn't go to somebody's GitHub and grab some VimRC with all these fancy customizations. I just started with blank VimRC, and I just built from there as I saw needs. As my needs came about, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to change this thing. So I'd search how to do that, and then I'd implement that. So that's really how I've gone about learning it. In terms of the overall process, I started on my first tutorials in June. And for a while after that, if I had a really basic document, like my little to-do list or something like that, I'd use it in Vim. And for quite a while, things were slow. It was not as efficient as the graphical text editor. And I recall later that summer in August, I was doing a big web project, and I was converting something in WordPress to just a plain static HTML site. But it was going to require a whole lot of work in a text editor. And at that point I said, hey, I need to just use my GUI editor, and because it was going to be too much. And that is already, month and a half later. It was like a month and a half, a couple months later. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what the process is like. And I remember maybe by October, I was starting to feel more comfortable, and things were becoming more automatic, and it was taking over more and more. Well, I think by that time I was using everything for Vim, but it was still getting baked into my muscle memory. And I would say maybe 6 months later was when finally I could just get on there, and I wasn't thinking very much about what I was doing. It was starting to just become automatic. And I would say even maybe 2 years later, in the last 4 years, I've seen how the process for 4.5 years has gone of becoming more and more automatic. I'd say even maybe in the last couple of years, it's gotten to where even when I'm just dog tired, I can just flow in Vim, and I'm not even thinking about what I'm doing. I'm thinking about the task at hand. I'm not thinking about what Vim keystrokes I'm doing. So I don't want people to think, oh, these guru people who use Vim, they just get it down in a week. It is a process. At least it was a process for me. And you can learn it and know the basic combination and kind of be doing that in a week. But until you're not going to be super efficient until after, a substantial amount of time and experience using it. But with that said, it was a huge investment, but I always say it was the second best technology decision I've ever made. The first, of course, was switching to Linux and having wonderful software freedom. But this is the second best technology decision I've ever made. So even though I teach Spanish, and that's not like a programmer's job or specifically an IT person's job, I teach Spanish and I manage the language lab. But even though I have that role, I am in Vim all day long. I use Vim all the time. So very rarely do I open up LibreOffice Writer these days. So actually, this past semester, there were a couple of tasks that I didn't feel like creating it was faster to just throw a PDF on my website instead of creating a web page. And so I used LibreOffice Writer, and yeah, it was problematic. I was hitting J and K and navigating as if I were in Vim and LibreOffice Writer and hitting escape constantly. So yeah, that could be a side effect when you use Vim all the time, but that's all right. I don't use it that often anyway. So, and I think I tend to do that sort of thing when I'm more tired anyways, when I haven't gotten enough sleep. But it's been well worth it. It's been worth the investment, and I love it. And it's better ergonomically too. I'm not reaching for the mouse and doing the other downside. The other downside is when you use a graphical editor, it can drive you crazy. So for example, I want to copy a whole line in Vim, you just hit YY. If I want to copy a whole line in a GUI editor, you have to reach for the mouse. Make sure you get before that first letter to select all the way over. Don't stop before you get to the last letter. And so it drives me crazy because I'm having to use these fine motor skills that in a GUI editor that I wouldn't use otherwise by using the mouse. And so it pretty much drives me crazy now to use a regular graphical editor. So I just go for Vim with everything. And so it's been an awesome investment. The last thing I want to mention is this critical if you use Vim or start learning Vim is I swapped the escape key in caps lock. So I will talk about that in a later video. But good luck with everything.